What you're about to see is a video produced by a Muslim group at Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park in London, England. And it is a dialogue between a Christian and Paul Williams, who is a revert to Islam. I'm going to take a look at the video, and I'm going to be interrupting it periodically with a critique on some of the remarks and assertions made by Mr. Williams.
In the last 30 years, for example, since the publication of Giza Vermisch's book Jesus the Jew in the 70s, there's been a new appreciation of Jesus as a Jew in his Jewish context. Yeah. Okay? Let me give an example of how powerful this is. The term Son of God in Christian, what does this mean, the term Son of God, as a Christian? What does this mean?
Yeah, do you mean what we mean today, or?
I'm asking what do Christians mean by Jesus being the Son of God?
Yeah, they mean that his divine nature emanates from
exactly. You're absolutely
the divine
right.
nature itself.
Thank you. It's the divine Jesus, the divine Son of God. Am I right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Right.
Now this is where theology matters. When discussing the person of the Lord Jesus, one must be very clear about what they believe about the deity of the Lord Jesus Christ. And you should be able to express it clearly from the scriptures, because Paul Williams is going to basically attack the idea that Jesus was in truly God come in the flesh.
Now this is the interesting thing about looking again at Jesus in his Jewish context. In first century Judaism, the Palestinian milieu that Jesus lived and died, the term Son of God did not mean a divine being, it meant a righteous man. Let me give an example. In Luke's Gospel chapter 3, you have a genealogy of Jesus. It goes all the way back to Adam. And what is Adam called? By Luke himself. Adam, do you know Luke calls Adam the Son of God.
Now here is where Paul Williams is simply trying to throw dust into the eyes of Christians. It is really quite disingenuous on Mr. Williams' part here. The reference in Luke to Adam being the Son of God means that that Adam was a direct creation of God. And the term Son of God in the New Testament is used some 40 times, and in every case it is a direct reference to the Lord Jesus Christ. It is not referring to anyone else but the Lord Jesus.
In the Torah itself, Israel is called the Son of God. David in Psalm chapter 2 is called Son of God. Angels are called.
Now here's a case where Paul is just plain mistaken. There is a reference in both Exodus chapter 3 and Hosea chapter 11 where God refers to Israel as his son, but nowhere in the Old Testament do you find Israel being called the Son of God. Neither do you with David. He made reference to Psalm 2 and verse 7, but in context it is a messianic psalm, and it is in reference to Christ. In reference to the angels being the sons of God, it's always used in the plural. And the only time the term the Son of God is found in the Old Testament is a reference in Daniel, and that is only in the King James when it talks about one like the Son of God. In the Hebrew, in actuality, it is is a son of the gods, and it is a pagan. Pagans are making reference to it. So there's no place again in the Old Testament where the term, the Son of God, is used.
Sons of God. Israel itself is a nation, and so it's never used of a divine figure.
Shabir Ali has a program called Let the Quran Speak, and he is very insistent that non-Muslims do not misinterpret the Quran and read into the Quran their own presuppositions. Well, I would like to see the same courtesy extended by Muslims to Christians and allow the Bible to speak for itself. I mean, in teaching Sunday school classes and teaching people on how to interpret the Bible, I basically tell them that the two main rules, or the two first rules they need in interpreting the Bible correctly, is to ask yourself two questions. The first being is, what was the writer's intent? What was the writer trying to actually tell you what he was thinking, or what was happening? And what would the hearers have understood, especially when you listen to the words of Jesus, what would those people have understood in the context of the way he was speaking? Unfortunately, Paul Williams wants to read into text. He doesn't want to engage in any type of exegesis. He wants to engage in eisegesis, and what he's doing, he is, allowing his own Unitarian and Islamic presuppositions. That is how he's interpreting the Bible, and he's not allowing the Bible to speak for itself. We're going to see that in the next clips.
It's actually a means of righteousness. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they should be called
Sons of God.
Sons of God.
Right.
You're a son. If you're a peacemaker, you're a son of God.
We've already dealt with what Paul has said in a previous segment. He's just making reference to basically where Jesus says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall become the sons of God. Again, he's just throwing dust, trying to confuse the issue. Here Jesus is simply, it's not a title. It's just simply not a title. It is rather a reference to Christians. Christians are called the sons or sons of God, but they are not, it is not, again, a reference to the Lord Jesus Christ, and it certainly, I would agree with Paul, it's not a reference to divinity. But we're going to look at the next clips and see whether or not when Jesus is called the Son of God, what does it mean? What would the people at that, what was the writer's intent when he calls Jesus the Son of God? What would the hearers have understood when Jesus himself called himself the Son of God? What would those people have understood? This is the issue. Paul wants to neglect it. He doesn't want to address it. But the question that should be asked him, Paul, what did Jesus mean, and what would have those people have understood?
According to Jesus, so it's not a divine title. But you see what's happened. Let me explain why it changed. But this is a really important bit.
No, you might be right, and I probably agree with you.
I could be wrong, but this is what scholars are convinced about. As the term Son of God moved out of its Jewish context, where it only meant a man,
you're right here,
into the Gentile pagan world, where there were son of gods and demigods, and Hercules was a half man, half god. Okay, you see what happened, don't you? The term lost its original rooting in Judaism and became a Gentile term. The word didn't change, the Son of God, but the meaning changed. Christianity changed from being a Jewish religion within Judaism to being a Gentile faith, where the Son of God, as then you correctly say, becomes a divine title. So you see the value of this renewed interest in the Jewishness of Jesus. It tells us that there's been a misunderstanding on the part of Christianity later about who Jesus was. When Jesus says, or is called Son of God, it doesn't mean that he was divine.
When Jesus is before the Sanhedrin, he's brought up on charges of blasphemy, and of course there's witnesses brought in, but they're contradicting one another, and so they have they can't, according to Jewish custom and law, find him guilty. And the Sanhedrin are becoming frustrated and trying by any which way they can to see Jesus condemned. So they come out and ask him point blank, and we read in the Gospel, Matthew used the term, Son of the Blessed, or are you the Son of God? Are you the Son of the Blessed? And he answers, I am. At that moment, the high priest tears his clothes. You said, you've heard the words yourself. What further proof do we have? He is guilty of blasphemy. In the Gospel of Mark, we have the same account of the trial of Jesus. He's brought before the Sanhedrin. He's asked by the high priest, are you the Son of God? Jesus again answers in the affirmative. The high priest tears his clothes. What further need do we, or why do we need any more witnesses? He's guilty of blasphemy. It is so unlikely that a person would be charged with blasphemy just for claiming they are a righteous man. They knew full well what Jesus meant when he says, I am the Son of God. In John chapter 19, verse 7, this is when Jesus is brought before Pilate. The Sanhedrin, again, are demanding his death. Pilate wants to let him go. Well, what charge? What reason do you have that I can put him to death? And they says, he claims he has made himself to be the Son of God. Again, if he's just making himself a righteous man, there would be no need. And it's interesting that here they say, we have a law. Because he called himself the Son of God, that they understood when Jesus called himself the Son of God, if he was not telling the truth, he was blasphemy. Was Jesus a blasphemer? I'll ask my Muslim friends, I'll ask Paul Williams, was Jesus a blasphemer? And he's going to have to say no. And so what is being understood here? Just by reading the New Testament itself and reading these passages, reading them in their historical context, how can anyone say that all the term Son of God means, or the term Son of God means, is a righteous man? It just doesn't make any sense. I just want to share very briefly some scriptures. John chapter 5, verses 16 through 18. The context is basically that Jesus has healed a man on the Sabbath. And the Jews are quite upset that he's working on the Sabbath. And he says, well, my Father, he's working on the Sabbath. And now they're really angry because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was calling God his Father, making himself equal with God. Scriptures are clear, Paul, that when we read them in the context, that when it refers to Jesus being the Son of God, it's referring to his divinity, that he truly is God come in the flesh. So, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with Jesus? And my Muslim friends, look at the Bible, read it in its context, and you don't have to believe the Bible, but if you're honest with yourself, all you can walk away and say is that the Bible does teach that Jesus Christ is God come in the flesh. Thanks for watching.